What's up guys, Filterless here, and man have we got an awesome update on the Ally. We're going over everything new, and I'm going to show you all these settings I found to work best for gyro controls in a couple different games, as well as a few extra tips and tricks, especially when trying to use the custom game profiles. We're also going to check out CPU boost and how to benefit from it being off, and we'll run a few benchmarks to see if the new update affected performance in any way. I've had a sore throat for a couple days, so the recording might sound a little bit off. Starting off with a smaller feature that I've seen asked about frequently on the channel, and that is keyboard shortcuts for Armory Crate. Now we can click on settings and then keyboard shortcuts at the bottom and set custom shortcuts for both Command Center and Armory Crate. This is especially useful if you're trying to use a dock setup and playing with a keyboard and mouse, as now you can quickly access the Command Center using a keyboard and access all those shortcuts in there. They also added a CPU boost toggle that you can add to Command Center. Instead of needing to go into the registry and modify it to enable the boost settings, you can quickly toggle it here. And here I have a YouTube video playing in the background, and we are set to performance mode with CPU boost enabled. As you can see, we're using about 10 watts. As soon as we toggle CPU boost off, it drops down to around 7 watts. One thing I'd like to see them add is the Windows power settings. We can actually save even more power by going into power settings and changing it from best performance to best power efficiency. You can see here in the same test, we're using close to 6 watts now. And even if we toggle CPU boost back on, the watts stay about the same, and we have Windows set to best power efficiency. However, Armory Crate will override this, so as soon as you toggle between the power profiles again, it will automatically switch Windows back to best performance. Also, when a game is putting this system under heavy load, it doesn't make as much of a difference. Here in Crisis, having CPU boost on versus off isn't affecting it much. Even changing Windows from performance to best power efficiency doesn't do much either. However, there is one area where CPU boost being off really shines, and that's when you're using an FPS cap in games or are utilizing only some of the system. Here in Subnautica, we have the TDP set to 25 watts and we're running a 40 FPS cap. You can see our battery drain is around 26 watts. Now look at this, just by toggling CPU boost off, we're dropping from 26 watts down to 19 almost immediately. This is a huge savings, and where turning boost off really helps along with lower temperatures. Some emulators or very CPU intensive games can benefit from CPU boost, and now it's easier than ever before to quickly toggle it and see if it does make a difference. I personally leave it off even when emulating a game like Breath of the Wild, as I prefer lower temps and fan noise to slightly higher FPS. Now onto the biggest addition, which is gyro support, and it works extremely well. I didn't calibrate mine, it seemed to work fine, but to calibrate it, you'll want to go to settings, then you'll click calibrate down at the bottom. Then off to the right, you'll click on gyro, and then here you'll want to set it on a table and then press the A button to start the calibration. You'll just have to let it sit for a few seconds and then it should be calibrated and good to go. And then you'll want to set this up on a per game basis by going to your game library, hovering over your game and hitting X or clicking the game profile at the bottom. Then you want to go down to gyro, and here you can tailor each game's gyro settings. I was worried about it not tracking small movements properly, but it does this very well. You can see here in Crisis just how precise and fast it is to aim with those gyro controls. And I found that using the joystick mode worked a lot better than the mouse mode. When it's in mouse mode, the movements feel more jagged and less precise. Usually mouse mode is the way to go, but testing both Crisis and Insurgency, I preferred using gyro as a right joystick on the Ally. First, we have the sensitivity, and that's making it so when you tilt and move the device, it moves faster in game. However, if your in-game sensitivity isn't high enough, you'll notice you hit sort of a wall. The reason for this is since it's emulating the right joystick, it can only pan the camera as fast as you would be able to pan if you push the joystick to 100%. And with gyro, I tend to whip the camera really fast sometimes, which exceeds how fast you could go at a 100% joystick press. So you might want to turn the sensitivity up in game if you're noticing that you're having to turn the sensitivity up really high in Armory Crate. As an example, if you were playing a game with max sensitivity in the game, then you'd be able to turn that gyro extremely fast, almost feeling like a mouse. The best way to test this would be get in the game and hit your joystick all the way to 100% and just see how fast it's moving, so you'll know how fast you'll be able to move with that gyro. For Anti-Deadzone, I found the default 20% to work really well. As you lower this down, it won't move as much with slight movement, to the point it won't move at all if you're slowly moving the device. This gets tricky to set up though with the main gyro sensitivity and this option. What I do first is adjust the main sensitivity higher and tilt the device at a normal pace or a more rapid pace until it feels like it's moving around properly. Then if you're trying to do very slight movement and it doesn't seem to move, turn the Anti-Deadzone up. If you're noticing that the movement seems to be jumping around when you're not moving the device, then this is something you might want to try turning down a little bit. Smoothing is something you want to reduce if you're noticing what feels like lag. You can see here what happens when I max the smoothing to 40%. It's extremely smooth, but the response is terrible. Then as I drop it down to 0%, it feels a lot more responsive. I found 20% felt like too much of a delay to me, so I'm usually running around 5%. And the 20% might not bother you, so definitely mess around with the settings to find what you like. In Insurgency specifically, it did not feel right at 0%, so I did set that to 5% to get rid of some of the jitter when aiming. The dead zone is something I thought I'd never use on gyro, but take a look in Insurgency Sandstorm how the crosshair is going up and to the left with no input at all from me. I found setting a 3% dead zone work perfect in this game. It still felt really responsive with the slightest movement, but didn't automatically start moving by itself. This is only something you'd want to increase if when you're holding your hand steady, the crosshair is actually moving by itself. And I'll have to mess around with these settings more and possibly create a controller guide in the future, but I hope this helps you get your setup and working well. And before we jump out of game profiles, I wanted to show y'all a great way to set up custom TDP limits in games. Hopefully Armored Crate just adds this at some point where we have a button and we can toggle between the watt ranges or assign a certain watt easily to a game. But for right now, the best method is to go to configuration. You can see operating mode AC, so that's when you're plugged in. You also have the operating mode DC, which is when you're on battery. You can see here I have a 13 watt and 17 watt option when on battery. And I set this up under the operating mode and the manual power option. You can simply click the three dots off to the right and rename the power setting to the watt level you set. Without going into too much depth, I recommend setting all three sliders to the same level. If you go below 15 watts, then you'll want to set the middle and right to 15 and then the left one to your desired watt range. Then you want to plug your device into a charger and set up custom profiles for that, since it's actually a separate set. Now when you go to a game, you'll have different power settings that it will automatically toggle. Like I said, hopefully Asus gives us a quick TDP slider or some other way to control this from Command Center. But until then, this could be a great option for you. One other thing to note is you'll need to be in auto mode for the control mode settings, as this is the only mode that uses custom game profiles. If you have this set to gamepad, it's a global override that will completely ignore your custom profiles and settings. So if it looks like what you set up for a specific game isn't working properly, double check that you're in auto mode and not gamepad mode. Something that I hoped they fixed was the FPS limiter not working. Also, VSync inside of the AMD control panel doesn't seem to work either, and it's been this way for years on all AMD GPUs I've had. I believe it's due to it not working properly in DirectX games. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all games. Hopefully AMD or Asus figure something out with this, as the FPS limiter combined with the CPU boost toggle could allow us to switch into a real battery saving mode pretty quickly. Right now, I found using Rivet Tuner to set an FPS limit is the best method. Another thing that got an update is the Asus monitor, and I really like the smaller top bar style for monitoring over the square box. This allows the information to be out of the way like we see on the Steam Deck. And we have what's called a minimal layout, which just gives us the time, battery life percentage, and FPS counter. Then we have one called RO that adds the CPU and GPU usage, as well as the frequencies and the frame time graph to the right to show us if we're getting any stutters or hiccups while playing. I'll definitely be using the minimum one and RO, as I didn't care too much for the default one, which is now called square. One last change is the battery icon in Command Center. It'll show a little exclamation if you have a charger connected that doesn't meet the minimum requirements. The thing that doesn't make sense with this though is I have a 100-watt charger connected to a hub that is pushing through at least 80 watts. And I still see this exclamation, but it will allow me to go into the 30-watt turbo mode and the battery won't drain at all as it is getting the full power. Then if I connect a Steam Deck charger, which is only 45 watts, I see the same exclamation point, but only have access to the 25-watt turbo mode. Then if I connect a 100-watt charger directly to the Ally, I no longer get the exclamation point. I think it would have been more useful to have this if it only showed up when it detected the power supply couldn't supply that 65 watts of power. So then you would immediately know if the charger you're using would allow 30 watts turbo or not. Maybe that will be something they update in the next update. Another thing that's awesome to see is the Joystick Sensitivity Curve. And part of this is essentially like the Anti-Deadzone feature where you can have it ramp up instead of it just immediately starting at a higher value. As you can see here, if you were to just pin the first dot to the left side, it does the exact same thing as the Anti-Deadzone option. So if you're wanting the joystick to feel more responsive with that very first initial movement, but don't want to shave off all of the initial movement completely, it's worth trying to move this first dot up and slightly to the right, as it'll have a ramp up instead of just instantly starting out at a higher value. And it's great to have full control over this sensitivity setting, so you can adjust the joystick to any responsiveness you would like for any game. And then onto performance, I ran a performance test after the update to see if there were any changes, and we can see here in Crisis we got the same 66 FPS average at 900p and 15 watts. Then upping it to 30 watts, we got 77 on both. At 1080p 15 watts, we got 49 FPS on both. And going up to 30 watts, we got 57 FPS for the average on both. Then on Horizon 5 at 900p 15 watts again, we're seeing 57 FPS. We got 75 FPS, bumping that up to 30 watts. We ended up getting 49 and 48 FPS at 1080p and 15 watts, and then 65 FPS on both at 30 watts. Then the last game I tested was Metro Exodus. We ended up with one less FPS on the right at 900p and 15 watts, so within margin of error. Then 82 and 81 FPS, so extremely close at 30 watts. 49 and 48 FPS at 15 watts at 1080p, and then 64 FPS on both at 30 watts. So they're all within margin of error. We're not losing nor gaining any performance, so everything looks good here. And if you're not seeing the gyro controls or you're not sure if you're updated, then you can open up Armory Crate, click on content at the top, and then the update center button. Here you're looking for Armory Crate SE version 1.4.5.0, which is the latest version. If you're seeing version 1.3.16, you want to click check for updates, and then the update button next to Armory Crate. You also want to make sure that the MCU firmware is updated, so just click update next to that if you see it as well. The last thing I wanted to quickly cover is the AMD settings that were added into Armory Crate. Now we can just toggle them on and off through here. However, we don't get any of the sliders for things like Radon Super Resolution or Radon Image Sharpening. So if you're wanting to adjust the sharpness value, you'll still need to go into the AMD control panel to adjust them. Also, the optimize button basically turns on the exact same settings as if you used HYPR-RX in the AMD control panel. So that's just turning on Radon Super Resolution, Radon Anti-Lag, and Radon Boost. I'll have a video link in the description of why I don't recommend using HYPR-RX if you're interested. And I have to give props to Asus, as they've really shown they're here for the long haul with these updates. And I still think the Ally is one of the best choices all around for a Windows handheld. Armory Crate gives it a more console-like experience with absolutely tons of useful features. VRR is a big deal for those that see it and prefer a smooth looking experience like myself. And somehow the screen is glossy but still gets rid of glare better than even etched screens on something like the Steam Deck. Hopefully Valve figures this out for the Steam Deck 2 so we can get a glossy screen that also eliminates reflections. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.